Hi, my name is Jan. I come from NIL. We are one of the largest system integrators in the region. We also operate one of the most advanced SOCs in the region. And unfortunately, I was asked to do this presentation in English because I had a really good title for the Slovenian version. So the English version is you better make good on your security debt. The Slovenian title was Veš pojet svoj varnostni dolg, which sounds very romantic, because it borrows from our heritage. So what we'll be talking about is, when I say boring, it means it's never flashy. I have this shocking trait that I claim that we shouldn't care about the latest attacks and vulnerabilities, but we should care about our system design. It is always very sexy to talk about the latest and greatest. So this is the new hack and so on, and everybody's like, wow, I have to fix something. But in reality, most of our energy should go typically into building our systems better, our defenses better, because those defenses are typically so weak that new attacks are not really interesting. If you look at the attacks over 10 or 20 years, you will see that the same things happen again. They're just, let's say, things in nude clothes. So how do we make good on our security debt? So first of all, let's discuss what that is. I'm actually making like a homage, you will see, to one of my idols. So security debt is basically connected to what we call technical debt. Technical debt is the cost of bad decisions we made in the past. When we said at a certain moment, well, look, let's do this the quick and dirty way, and we'll fix it later. And the technical debt is basically the cost. It could be the monetary cost or the innovation cost, which accumulates over the years and prevents us from moving forward in the future. So the idea is that also the interest accumulates. The more quick and dirty solutions you will do now, the more interest you will have to pay in the future, the larger your debt will be. To make things much more easy to understand, it is basically this. Every diet starts tomorrow. So whenever you're facing a security decision, how to secure a system, you can either say, wait, I will do it properly, or you can say, well, let's do some shortcuts and we'll do it tomorrow. And the technical debt is basically the idea that after a couple of years, typically the debt is so big that we are stuck. We cannot innovate, we cannot secure, and so on. And security debt is the equivalent of technical debt in security. Technical debt is typically a software development term, when people do quick and dirty code solutions, so the software becomes unmaintainable in the future. And security debt, for me, is something which we'll do in our security design, which makes the system impossible to secure in the future. By the way, I hate to do vendor presentations or product placement presentations, so only the last slide is product placement. So we will talk philosophy for 95% of the presentation, and at the end we'll see where this leads. So this is technical debt, and I am actually doing a homage to Ivan Pepelnjak, one of the original owners of NIL, who basically created a presentation in technical debt, the killer of IT creativity, about 5 years ago. And I said, well, the same thing typically goes for IT security. So decisions we do in security basically influence our security future. And when Ivan said, technical debt is the killer of IT creativity, I don't wholly agree. There's one exception to this part. So anyone remember FTP, the file transfer protocol? Somebody perhaps still uses it. So FTP was a horribly designed protocol, and if you remember it, you know that the big problem of FTP, if you're the security guy, was that it opens dynamic connections in your network. So you couldn't somehow, with pre-built rules, permit or deny it. But if you search Google or YouTube a little bit for Marcus Raynham is the father of the firewall, so he created the first firewall. He had a TED talk about FTP basically being one of the big technical debts of security. But what is also true is that FTP, because it was a protocol which couldn't be described by static access lists and routers, created the whole industry of firewalls. So checkpoint firewall 1 at the time, and so on and so on. So firewalls were created initially to deal with the problem of FTP. So a 1 billion industry in 2 years, that was basically the innovation which was created by something which a lazy programmer did during writing the FTP client and server. So you can see that some technical debts can lead to IT creativity, but this is more the exception than a good example. So this is the idea behind technical debt. So quick shortcut decisions we made in the past influencing our future, and during security system design, the same thing happening in our security future. The second thing I would like to also perhaps stress is that technical debt also has some other effect associated with it, which is called the ratchet effect. What is a ratchet? A ratchet is a system of mechanical gears which can only go in one direction. Like this tool which you see here, like when you tighten a screw, you can tighten it only in one direction. It doesn't go in the other. This is like a mechanical equivalent of a hash function. It goes one way, but it cannot be reversed. And mostly when we do our sins, when we increase our security debt or technical debt, at that moment we're not aware, but the ratchet effect goes in. Whenever we make a decision to make a shortcut and think we'll be able to reverse it in a couple of months of time, it cannot be done. And you know that every single decision we make will change the system when it's in operation, so those changes are very unlikely to be able to be unrolled back. So ratchet effect basically means whatever we're doing, there is no reversal possible. And if you make a bad security decision, it is very likely to stay there. So technical debt increases and security debt increases over time. There is typically no way to roll it back. And now you're saying, yes, Jan, of course, this is entropy. So every single system will tend to increase its entropy. This is a very nice joke, by the way. Entropy isn't what it used to be. So it is true that typically everything tends to go towards higher chaos, to be more chaotic. But is there a way to tackle this? Is there a way to look at systems from the past which were done based on quick, let's say, shortcut decisions and so on, and secure them today? This is the big question I think everybody is facing today. So nobody is faced with building a greenfield network or greenfield platform or so on, except those of you moving to the cloud, where you can actually say, I can perhaps do things the right way from the start. But most of you are facing a large hodgepodge, or what software developers like to call a big ball of mud, which is your IT. So, how does technical debt compare to security debt? This is the really, I think, important question. Now let's spend a couple of minutes discussing that. So when we talk about technical debt, when we make a software development typically decision, which basically says, I will do something quick and dirty and fix it later on. And in a couple of years, you find out that your software has become unmaintainable because of this. Typically, this is a problem of innovation. You cannot continue using a certain product or a certain application. You have to rewrite it from scratch. So products become unmaintainable for vendors, or your own custom software becomes unmaintainable and unupgradable for you. So, and this is, let's say, technical debt. But technical debt is somehow localized. It concerns this system. It concerns this application. So if you look at the wealth of the applications you have in your IT, for example, perhaps some of them are custom applications, you can always say, yeah, I know there are some issues with this application. Yeah, I know there are some issues with this application. And when you look at the risk of this, you can say, well, there is a certain degree of risk that this application might malfunction or become unupgradable, unmaintainable. And yes, there is some risk here as well. But those are quite local risks. With security debt, things are a bit different. I use the sum symbol. This is the deep thought warning. I'll try to explain it perhaps in other words. When we have security debt, the risk should be considered differently, because when we look at the risk from unmaintainable software for functionality, we have specific islands of problems. If you look at the risk from a security perspective, remember the old security saying, the odds are on the side of the attacker. The attacker has to find a single issue while I have to fix everything. If you start layering and adding your security debt together, something in this application, something in this application, something in this application, you're basically creating a huge ball of vulnerability. And when the attacker is looking at you and your debt your security debt, they're basically seeing the sum of all the bad decisions you made in the past. So the risk is much different. The risk is the sum of all the small risks you had. So it's a much bigger problem to do security shortcuts, because the risk kind of sums up, is not individually contained to some applications, but from the attacker's perspective, he can pick and choose from your bad decisions. So this is really, really important. Security debt is kind of cumulative, while technical debt is kind of localized. So security debt is more global to your enterprise, and basically every single time you make a small decision, you're not aware of it, but you're making your big ball of mud of vulnerability bigger. So this is the problem of security debt. It does not remain contained. And whenever somebody will do this first access to your system and get through the first barrier, he's likely to see the whole big bug, this big ball of mud of your vulnerabilities. So this was the first deep thought. The second thing, oh thanks, cheers. Some good schnapps, I hope. Okay, so how do we address this? How do we address the issue that we are faced with this history of debt? So we have this huge ball of vulnerability in our IT. So for technical debt, we are pretty sure what to do. Let's rewrite this application. Let's buy another application from another vendor. So you can partially solve the problem to a certain degree of satisfaction. But with security, we have this idea in our heads that, yeah, I have this long list of vulnerabilities. Let's do the most important ones first, and so on. I would urge you to rethink this approach. So if you, for example, use vulnerability scanning or something like this, and you get a report saying, this is the list of things which are wrong in my IT. And you're typically saying, okay, I will just do the red ones. I will fix the red ones, and I will leave the rest for later on. I think this thinking is very dangerous. Yes, it makes the problem manageable, but it doesn't make the problem go away. Because most of the time, most of the assessments which you do, realistically, have the severities set by the vendors. So you're very likely to miss vulnerabilities which are extremely important and critical in your environment, although they are not colored in red. So that is one thing. So I wouldn't think that there are the same principles which govern how to address technical debt. Let's fix things part by part, and how to fix things when you look at your security debt. So some examples how I would suggest you would solve your debt problem. First of all, quit your job. So this is, I think, this is the simplest thing. So you see that in a company that you work, the security debt is just crazy, and you say, there are so many problems for the past, I just don't want to work with this anymore. And you go to another company. And hopefully the other company says, we have a greenfield situation, we can start accumulating security debt from zero. And in 1 year you will see, oh, we have security debt, and you will go to another job. So this is the simple solution. The second solution is find a sucker and sell him your security debt. This is called cyber insurance. You go to some company and say, to the insurance company and say, well, yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, can you insure me for $10 million? And they will say, well, do you have any security debt? No, almost nothing. Yeah. So this works. Go sell your debt to somebody else. The third option is ignore your debt. Keep on pumping and sink into the quicksand. And the fourth approach, which I am a big fan of, use some security engineering approaches to actually look at your security debt, to actually face your security debt and say, I actually know what to do. And this is an approach which not a lot of people are taking. A lot of people are taking the first three approaches. Now, how do we employ security engineering to look at the mistakes from our past? First of all, let's return to Risk 2018. I had a presentation which was called Smart Security Investing, Change Your Game, where I basically said, in Slovenia, and in this region especially, we are constantly forgetting that security controls are of two different kinds. They are preventive and they are detective. And an amazingly small number of companies is considering detective controls. Detective controls being the ones which, through analysis, inform you something is going on, but cannot prevent it because of their false positive prone, and so on and so on. But my argument last year was that even though everybody would like to do as much prevention as possible, and because in our minds prevention is the way to go, people start investing in the wrong products. Products which basically do very little and cost a lot. And if we look at securities as such as yin-yang proposition that we have prevention and detection, we have a bunch of different controls available for prevention. From firewalls, IPSs, host intrusion prevention, blah, blah, blah. A lot of different things are available, but a lot of those things typically encounter a barrier at deployment time. So when you say, well, I want to deploy really effective prevention, effective meaning something extremely tailored to my environment, you are crashing exactly in your technical debt. Basically, your environment is not ready to accept such controls. The software is not written that way, the platforms are not configured that way, and so on. So here is where security crashes with technical debt. All the shortcuts you made in non-security related things are now impacting the deployment of your prevention capability. So you're saying, yeah, I want to deploy the web application firewall. Give me the description of how the application works, and everybody's laughing at you. Nobody knows how the application works. And then you're forced to go with inferior solutions, signature-based approaches, and so on. So the technical debt which you accumulated is basically stopping you from deploying proper prevention. And I think the answer is not buying more prevention products which automatically works despite your technical debt, because that means they actually don't work at all. But the answer last year I argued is to finally look at this beautiful garden of detection. The previous speaker said the CM is your last line of defense. No, I think the CM is often your first line of defense or only line of defense. If you don't have prevention in place for certain things, there is no other thing than detection which will help you. So we have to get rid of this mentality. We have prevention, and if prevention fails, we have detection. Detection is an equal rights citizen in this ecosystem. And there is a bunch of things, a whole lot of extremely advanced attacks for which we don't have really good preventive mechanisms. On paper, yes, but in reality, no. And look at the right-hand side of this symbol. How many of those technologies have you deployed? Or if you look at your peers in the region, in Slovenia, how popular are those technologies actually in companies, organizations in Slovenia? Not very popular, because everybody is fixated on getting prevention right, and then if we have time, perhaps we can deploy detection. And to make things even more interesting, this is the second deep thought of the day. People who use CMs, do they mostly integrate it with the prevention part or detection part of this circle? With the prevention part. You deploy a bunch of preventive mechanisms, you connect it to the CM, and CM is what? Telling you the quality of prevention? Or is it telling you what the prevention missed? Or is it telling you what you don't have prevention for? I don't understand why you use the CM. I'm not saying throw your CM away, but I'm basically saying the real, I think, essence of CM and CM-like technologies is in marshalling and orchestrating the detection part with the help of the prevention part. But if you don't have the detection part done right, if you don't have the sensors and the information coming in, I think there's obviously not a very efficient thing going on. Okay, why is this so? Because in Slovenia we play the waiting game. The waiting game means I will wait until my competitor deploys something, and if it's okay, then I will deploy it as well. This is called the non-early adopter approach. So we are so risk averse that even for things which are obvious, things which are things which are obviously extremely useful on the right-hand side, we are waiting for others to try it first. And we rather buy one more product on the left-hand side because it gives us this fuzzy, warm feeling of prevention. So this waiting game is a risk management approach. Yeah? I will not try something which nobody I know has tried to reduce risk of bad investment. But what you're actually doing is you're saying, I will not do detection because nobody I know is doing it properly, but your risks, your security risks, will remain uncovered, unaddressed. So basically what you're doing is you're reducing risk, but you're increasing risk at the same time. You're reducing your investment risk, but your risk of being hacked is growing. Not because of the attacks getting more and more sophisticated, because they're not, but because there are so much more many attacks and many more attackers willing to attack you. So the waiting game is the Slovenian way of investing in security. So what do we do? Last year we have talked a lot about the Security Operations Center. So when you decide that it's time, and it's high time for actually looking at the second 50% of security, at detection, you typically start thinking about SOC. Security Operations Center, you find out your first obstacles. You say, I don't have the people. Yeah, I have the CM, but nobody's watching it. Should I rent an external service and so on? Yes, so this is a good start of thinking. When you start going deeper into why or how you would implement a SOC in your environment, there are typically two plans. And today we're here to talk about one of those plans. Most of you are thinking in an enterprise integration kind of way, which is something I call Plan B. Plan B is basically saying, I have an organization, I have a CM, I perhaps have a security automation solution as well, and I have a bunch of integrations in that particular CM, which I basically feed to the CM, firewall, IPS, anti-malware, and so on. And you're saying, with those prevention mechanisms, I'm covering quite a lot of threats, but not all. Well, let's face it, we're always typically saying, I still have some areas which I'm totally blind in. And when you start considering deploying a SOC in your environment, the first obstacle is the people, but the people is solvable by using an external service. The second problem is, what about the coverage issues you have in my environment? So we start thinking, well, I have the firewall, but I don't have the sandbox. I have IPS, but I don't have NetFlow. I have anti-malware, but I don't have EDR. And then you say, basically, well, I'm missing so many event sources. I am blind to a certain degree because I was blindly investing in prevention, that perhaps the SOC idea is not good, because if I don't feed them enough data, they will not be able to detect everything. The first counter argument to that is the typical time to detection, remember, is about 100 days today still. So the time of detection of somebody looking at your stuff or changing your stuff is about 100 days from the moment it happens. And any SOC worth its name should detect this in much shorter period than 100 days. So you're definitely reducing your exposure whenever you start looking at the activity in your system. But the other thing which is I think important is, whenever you start thinking about what you are missing, you're always saying, well, the list is so long, it will take me so much time to bring up my detection quality or the information quality to the level when I'm mature enough for SOC. So for example, I'm missing EDR, I'm missing NetFlow, and so on. And typically, what happens is, if you subscribe to this approach, the good approach would be accepting that and working with your SOC vendor to fill those gaps with appropriate technology in the future. So your SOC service vendor will say, well, let's start with what you have, and then start adding additional sensors for the cloud, for the EDR, and so on. But this is something which looks like a long project. To be very fair with you, in our SOC, we say to customers, first 3 months is simply onboarding. We will take 3 months for integration of what you have, and tuning of everything before we are confident enough to have information flow which satisfies our analysts. But what if you want to have earlier results? Or what if your current environment is so prevention focused that you don't really have any detection sources to show? There's an easy solution, as always. Yeah? You buy a product. So what has happened in the past is that some vendors obviously have seen that this is something which is a market niche. So today what you can do is you can basically buy integrated systems which provides you with, let's say, the majority of detection capability with a single deployment. So you can buy systems which basically can create a platform for analysis which gets both endpoint, network, and honeypot data together in a single platform. And by using this, you can actually deploy a reasonable SOC service or a feed to a SOC service in a matter of days or weeks, compared to months or even years. Yeah. So it is not as integrated with your environment, of course, because as I said, security should fit you like a glove. So if you set up a certain monitoring environment, which for example does not integrate with your HR applications, of course you're losing something. But initially, you're typically getting 80% of what you need in general. And then you can fill out the rest of the 20% throughout SOC operation. So as I said, I will save my marketing speech for the last slide. So NIL has offered a SOC in the market for now almost a year and a half. We have built SOC centers abroad as well. And one of the things we have seen is that customers, again, sometimes are not ready because of their event feeds not being ready. So we are typically, at NIL, going with plan B, the right-hand side of the equation, by saying, whatever you have, let's see it, let's import it, and let's work with you to achieve better maturity over the months and years. But what we're doing now as well, as an additional thing, we're basically also offering a platform of analysis. So we have partnered with Fidelis, which basically provides an endpoint network honeypot solution, which brings you the entire right-hand side of that yin-yang symbol, and connecting this to the brains of our guys in the SOC. So if you want to hear more about Fidelis, there's a session tomorrow. If you want to hear about NIL SOC, welcome to visit us at our stand. I hope I was able to somehow give you the rationale, or basically the reasons of why we are doing a SOC at NIL. And this was the security debt. Thank you.